April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above Caen, France. The oxygen mask failed to conceal Oberleutnant Ralph Hermachen's condescending smirk as he observed the cumbersome silhouettes ascending laboriously toward his formation through the crystalline canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5. The veteran ace of Jagdgeschwader 26, age 26, scrutinized the American fighters making their inaugural combat appearance over occupied Europe. "The armies have dispatched airborne milk bottles," he transmitted to his wingman, incapable of suppressing his derisive laughter at the spectacle of the massive Republic P-47 Thunderbolts straining for altitude. Beneath them, 16 P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group ascended ponderously in tight formation, their 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engines contending against their 7-ton mass. To German aviators accustomed to the streamlined Spitfires and agile Soviet fighters, these corpulent American machines appeared almost farcical. Fuselages resembling barrels, crowned with greenhouse canopies, wings that seemed disproportionately small for their voluminous bodies, propellers that eclipsed anything in the Luftwaffe's inventory. What Hermachen remained ignorant of, what none of the German pilots circling like predatory wolves above could possibly have conceived, was that they were witnessing the advent of the instrument that would systematically annihilate the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. Within 18 months, these derided flying milk bottles would undergo a metamorphosis from objects of ridicule into implements of terror, their 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns becoming the most dreaded acoustic signature in German airspace. The arithmetic of devastation was already embedded within those broad wings: 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire approaching 6,000 rounds per minute, a concentration of firepower sufficient to bifurcate a Messerschmitt in under 2 seconds. This transformation commenced on that April morning when Major Donald Blakesley, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, identified the German formation maneuvering for an assault. The former Eagle Squadron veteran, having transitioned from RAF Spitfires mere weeks prior, comprehended what his men had yet to learn, that survival in the P-47 necessitated the abandonment of every established doctrine of aerial engagement. The Thunderbolt constituted a radical divergence from conventional fighter design philosophy. While German engineers had pursued lightweight interceptors optimized for climb and turn performance, Republic Aviation had engineered an unprecedented entity, a high-altitude juggernaut that utilized mass, power, and overwhelming firepower to redefine the very principles of aerial combat. Among the 56 American pilots dispersed across the French firmament that morning were individuals destined to become legends, future aces whose names would instill trepidation in Luftwaffe hearts. Yet on April 8, 1943, they were novices in an unproven machine, confronting the world's most seasoned fighter force. The Germans had been engaged in continuous combat since 1939, with veterans of Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. The Americans possessed precisely 0 days of combat experience. This narrative delineates how industrial pragmatism triumphed over tactical brilliance, how quantitative and qualitative attributes merged into overwhelming superiority, and how the derisive laughter of German pilots transmuted into sheer terror as they discovered the effects of synchronized Browning machine guns upon an aircraft at 400 yards. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt materialized from a panic in June 1940. As German fighters dominated French skies, Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, received urgent specifications from the U.S. Army Air Corps, demanding a high-altitude interceptor capable of challenging the Luftwaffe's finest. What Kartveli conceived, however, was a behemoth that redefined possibility. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli conceded to his design team, but a dinosaur with impeccable proportions. The XP-47B prototype, making its inaugural flight on May 6, 1941, astonished all observers. At 9,900 pounds empty, its mass exceeded its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer, by 65%. The immense turbo-supercharger apparatus, with its intricate ductwork traversing the rear fuselage, bestowed an almost gravid profile. Test pilots, approaching it for the first time, invariably posed the same inquiry: does this contraption actually achieve flight? Not only did it fly, it performed like no other aircraft at altitude. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial generating 2,000 horsepower, could sustain maximum power at 27,000 feet, an altitude where German fighters gasped for atmospheric sustenance. The exhaust-driven turbo-supercharger delivered sea-level performance in the stratosphere, where the attenuated air proved insufficient for conventional superchargers. Major Hubert Hub Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group during training in Bridgeport, Connecticut, initially held the aircraft in contempt. His unit suffered the loss of 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training mishaps between September 1942 and January 1943. The P-47 claimed more American lives in training than Germans would during its initial combat months. It was prone to ground looping on landing, torque rolling on takeoff, and diving with such alacrity that pilots encountered compressibility, their controls locking as shock waves formed over the wings. Yet those who mastered its intricacies discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma, destined to become a leading American ace with 27 victories, described his inaugural flight. It was analogous to securing oneself to a locomotive. The power was inconceivable. One did not pilot it, one directed it. The initial combat encounters in April and May 1943 appeared to validate every German prejudice. The P-47s could not outturn the Focke-Wulf 190C, could not outclimb the Messerschmitt 109S, and could not rival their nimble handling at medium altitudes. Luftwaffe pilots rapidly devised tactics to exploit these deficiencies, attacking from beneath where the heavy Thunderbolts were disadvantaged, compelling turning engagements where agility superseded firepower. Hauptmann Josef Pips Priller, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, reported to headquarters after his first encounter, "The new American fighter is fodder for the slaughter. It maneuvers like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a gravid bovine. Our personnel derisively label them Indians, portly targets masquerading as warriors." The statistics seem to corroborate German confidence. In their first operational month, American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts against only 3 confirmed German eliminations. The RAF, observing from their Spitfire squadrons, discreetly suggested the Americans reconsider their mount. British pilots japped that the optimal evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and circumnavigate the capacious cockpit. Yet an anomalous phenomenon was transpiring in these early encounters. One German intelligence failed to discern. The P-47's parachutes that were shot down had absorbed incredible punishment prior to succumbing. One aircraft returned from a May 4th mission exhibiting 21 cannon impacts and over 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant systems, withstood impacts that would have incapacitated a liquid-cooled fighter. More significantly, when P-47s successfully targeted adversaries, the consequences were catastrophic. The Thunderbolt's weapons battery created a convergence zone of devastation unprecedented to German pilots. Unlike the rifle-caliber armaments of early war fighters or cannon with limited ammunition, the American fighter could sustain continuous fire for over 30 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. The incident that initiated the shift in German perceptions occurred on June 26, 1943, over Lazo, France, involving 2nd Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron, an encounter destined to achieve legendary status on both sides. Johnson's formation of 48 P-47s was returning from escort duty when they were ambushed by 16 Focke-Wulf 190S from T/JG-26, led by Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Wutz Galland, younger sibling of the renowned Adolf Galland. The Germans executed an impeccable attack, diving from the solar disk with an overwhelming velocity advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, positioned at the formation's rear, was immediately enveloped in crossfire, sustaining catastrophic damage within the engagement's initial seconds. Multiple 20 mm cannon shells detonated across his airframe. The canopy disintegrated, hydraulic fluid inundated the cockpit, the engine cowling was sheared away, and fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded by shrapnel, attempted to bail out, but discovered the canopy was irrevocably jammed, a 20 mm shell having fused the track. He was entombed within a mortally wounded aircraft at 27,000 feet. What ensued defied all presumptions regarding combat damage tolerance. Despite obliterated forward visibility, a faltering engine, and unresponsive controls, Johnson managed to stabilize the aircraft and orient it toward England. The P-47 continued its flight bearing damage that would have consigned any other fighter to disintegration. The situation deteriorated further. A solitary Focke-Wulf 190 piloted by an unidentified aviator from 2./JG-26 discovered the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the channel below 170 miles per hour. Historical analysis has never conclusively identified this pilot, though several candidates have been proposed. What followed was one of the most extraordinary episodes in aerial warfare annals. The German pilot positioned himself astern Johnson's P-47 and discharged his entire 20 mm cannon and 13 mm machine gun ammunition. Johnson, incapable of evasion, could only crouch behind his armor plate. The Thunderbolt absorbed the complete cannon munitions. The German then repositioned and fired again, exhausting his machine gun ammunition. The cannon ammunition depleted, the German pilot drew alongside, gazing in incredulity at the flying wreckage. Johnson discerned his countenance, youthful, fair-haired, his expression transitioning from assurance to bewilderment to an emotion verging on trepidation. The German repositioned and expended his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still, it remained airborne. He drew alongside once more, shook his head in apparent astonishment, offered an informal salute, and banked away, presumably having exhausted his munitions. Johnson's P-47 landed at Manston with its engine failing on the runway. The crew chief ceased counting projectile impacts after surpassing 200. One cannon shell had detonated inches from Johnson's cranium. Another had exploded against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine had sustained direct strikes, control cables were partially severed, and 3 of the 4 primary fuselage longerons were compromised. Yet the aircraft had repatriated him. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent reverberations through both air forces. American engineers, examining the wreckage, recognized they had underestimated their own creation. German intelligence, receiving combat reports, initially refused credence. No aircraft could endure such punishment, yet testimony from multiple pilots confirmed the implausible. The Thunderbolt had withstood the entirety of the Luftwaffe's premier fighters' arsenal and survived. By July 1943, American pilots were learning to leverage the P-47's authentic strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, 56th Fighter Group commander, had deduced the secret through arduous trial and error. Do not attempt to outturn them. Do not contest their climb at low altitude. Utilize your mass. Utilize your power. Utilize your armament. The Thunderbolt's immense mass, initially perceived as a liability, became a weapon. In a dive, nothing could intercept it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could achieve 550 miles per hour, a velocity unattainable by any German fighter, even in a vertical descent. This velocity could be transmuted into altitude via a zoom climb that left pursuing fighters impotently trailing. Captain Walter Bud Mahurin, who would rank among the first American aces in Europe, developed the boom and zoom tactic dubbed the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of engaging in conventional dogfights, P-47 formations would ascend to 30,000 feet, beyond German fighters' effective operational ceiling. When Luftwaffe fighters materialized below, the Thunderbolts would execute inverted dives, achieving velocities that rendered deflection shooting impracticable for defenders. At the dive's terminus, the American heavy machine guns would articulate. German survivors described confronting a wall of lead, the combined firepower generating an impenetrable zone of annihilation. Aircraft ensnared in this convergence pattern didn't merely descend, they disintegrated. The authentic revelation of American firepower occurred during the August 17, 1943, dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the deepest penetration into Germany attempted to date. This mission would demonstrate both the P-47's limitations, its range even with auxiliary tanks, and its terrifying efficacy when properly deployed. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt 110 destroyer aircraft positioning to assail B-17s with their heavy cannon and rocket armaments. The twin-engine German fighters, heavily armed yet less maneuverable, constituted the Luftwaffe's specialized bomber killers. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts initiated their assault dive from 28,000 feet. Unteroffizier Heinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the May 110s who survived, later recounted during interrogation, "The American fighters descended like celestial hammers. I commenced firing at 800 meters. Confirmed impacts. I observed strikes on the fighter's wing. The P-47 exhibited no deviation. Then he returned fire. The aircraft preceding us simply fragmented. Not downed, annihilated. Wings separated from fuselage. Empennage severed. The crew compartment shredded into metallic confetti. Within 2 seconds, a 110 ceased to exist. 8 Messerschmitts, 109s and 110s were destroyed in under 60 seconds. The German pilots had never encountered such concentrated firepower. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 rounds total, weighing nearly 900 pounds. At the standard convergence distance of 300 yards, all 8 guns' ballistic trajectories intersected within a zone approximately 6 feet in diameter. Any entity within that zone confronted 100 half-inch projectiles per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself constituted a revelation of American industrial capacity. While German fighters contended with limited cannon ammunition, typically 120-200 rounds for a 20 mm weapon, American pilots could sustain fire for over 30 seconds. The standard combat load amalgamated armor-piercing incendiary, tracer, and standard ball ammunition in configurations engineered for both destruction and ignition. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, who would become the premier American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect: "When you engage them with all 8 weapons, they do not merely descend, they detonate." I witnessed a 109 literally bisected, the empennage descending in one trajectory, the nose and wings in another. The pilot remained oblivious to his fate. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was confronting another horrifying reality regarding the P-47. Its performance enhanced dramatically with altitude, whereas German fighters suffered. The turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine maintained its rated power output to 30,000 feet. German fighters, dependent on single- or two-stage mechanical superchargers, witnessed significant performance degradation above 25,000 feet. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most accomplished aces with 206 victories, encountered this reality fatally on October 8, 1943. Leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190A6 lethargic and unresponsive in the rarefied air. The BMW 801 engine, potent at medium altitudes, gasped for oxygen nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When P-47's TOW of the 56th Fighter Group dove upon his formation from 32,000 feet, the German fighters were immobilized targets. Robert Johnson, now a seasoned combat pilot progressing toward ace status, was cruising at 31,000 feet when he identified Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf with its elaborate nose art. Johnson's combat report was clinical. Initiated fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection, observed strikes along the entire fuselage, enemy aircraft detonated, no parachute observed. Philipp's demise sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their finest, a veteran of over 500 combat missions across eastern and western fronts, could not survive against the Thunderbolts, what opportunity existed for average pilots? The German High Command mandated an immediate investigation into the P-47's capabilities. The report delivered to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring in November 1943 was sobering. The Thunderbolt's service ceiling surpassed 42,000 feet, beyond the reach of any German fighter. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Its armor incorporated a 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, a 1/2-inch bulletproof glass windscreen, and armored deflection plates surrounding the engine. Most disturbingly, its rugged construction permitted it to absorb damage that would obliterate 3 conventional fighters and still repatriate. In January 1944, a new P-47 variant began arriving in England, completing the transformation from object of derision to nightmare. The P-47 D-22 featured a Hamilton standard hydromatic propeller with paddle blades 13 feet in diameter, with broad chord airfoils that grasped the atmosphere like colossal oars. The enhancement in climb rate was instantaneous and dramatic, whereas initial Thunderbolts ascended at an anemic 2,200 feet per minute at sea level. The paddle blade variants achieved 3,000 feet per minute, rivaling or surpassing German fighters across most altitudes. The immense propeller also improved acceleration, enabling P-47s to accumulate energy more rapidly in level flight. Hauptmann Heinz Knocke of Jagdgeschwader 11, a veteran of over 200 combat missions, encountered the new variants in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. He recorded in his combat diary, "The portly American fighters have mastered the climb. We ambushed a formation anticipating our customary advantage. They turned into us and ascended with us. When we attempted to disengage, they pursued us to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was intercepted and blown asunder. Merely smoke and fragments remain. These are not the identical machines we ridiculed last year." The paddle blade propeller did more than enhance performance. It altered the Thunderbolt's acoustic signature. The distinctive thundering roar generated by blade tips attaining supersonic velocities was audible for miles. German ground forces reported an ability to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone, a profound, menacing rumble signifying death from above. They designated it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. The standard configuration carried two 108-gallon wing tanks or a 75-gallon ventral tank, extending range beyond 1,000 miles. With the paddle blade propeller providing enhanced performance even when laden, Thunderbolts could engage on equitable terms immediately after jettisoning tanks. The Luftwaffe's response was to concentrate on the bombers, hoping to inflict sufficient losses to halt the American daylight campaign. Yet this necessitated traversing the P-47 escort screen, an increasingly suicidal proposition. German pilots developed a resentful respect bordering on dread for the substantial American fighters. Major Gunther Rahl, one of Germany's foremost aces with 275 victories, predominantly on the Eastern Front, survived a P-47 encounter on March 6, 1944, that left him severely wounded. He later recalled, "We observed them above us, corpulent silhouettes against the sun. Someone laughed and remarked, 'Here come the flying swine.' 30 seconds later, no one was laughing. They descended like an avalanche, swifter than we could react. The initial pass eliminated 3 of our fighters, simply eradicated, transformed into incandescent debris. Their weapons did not discharge in bursts like ours. They emitted continuous streams of fire. Interception within that stream signified instantaneous death." The escort missions unveiled another P-47 advantage: endurance. While German fighters operated at maximum power settings, rapidly consuming fuel, the substantial American radials could cruise efficiently at high altitude. Thunderbolts could remain with the bombers for hours, rotating protective cover while retaining sufficient fuel for combat and return, as increasing numbers of P-51 Mustangs arrived to assume long-range escort duties in spring 1944. P-47 units progressively focused on ground attack, a role that would establish them as the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The transition commenced in earnest in April 1944, as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery proved equally efficacious against terrestrial targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the upper armor of most German vehicles, while the sheer projectile volume could annihilate unarmored targets within seconds. A 2-second burst delivered 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area equivalent to a truck. However, the integration of bombs and rockets transmuted the P-47 into a genuine multi-role behemoth. The D-25 variant could transport two 1,000-pound bombs beneath the wings and a 500-pound bomb under the fuselage, a bomb load equivalent to early war medium bombers. Subsequent variants incorporated zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVRs, each comparable to a 105 mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground assaults directly. They approached at low altitude, so minimal one could discern the pilots' faces. The acoustic signature was terrifying, engines thundering, rockets shrieking. Then the percussive impact of those heavy machine guns. A convoy of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in a single pass. The psychological impact upon the men was devastating. They called them Jabos, fighter bombers, but these entities transcended that designation. They were aerial artillery possessing sniper-like precision. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe discovered how utterly the balance of power had shifted. Over 500 P-47s provided an aerial umbrella over the invasion beaches, creating an impenetrable canopy. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were massacred. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader 2, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported, "The firmament belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were tiered from sea level to 30,000 feet. We attempted to penetrate at dawn, 12 fighters from our group. I was the sole returnee. The P-47s were positioned at every altitude. One could not ascend above them, nor dive below them. Their weapons converted our fighters into aluminum precipitation." In the weeks subsequent to D-Day, P-47s systematically annihilated German daylight movement. The statistics were staggering. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, and 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was compelled to move exclusively under darkness, severely impeding their capacity to counter Allied advances. The Germans attempted every conceivable countermeasure, reinforcing vehicle armor, deploying additional anti-aircraft artillery, developing novel camouflage techniques. Nothing proved effective. The P-47's amalgamation of velocity, armor, and firepower rendered it nearly invulnerable. Even the dreaded 88mm flak guns struggled to track the rapidly maneuvering fighters at low altitude. While devastating Europe, the P-47 simultaneously validated its worth in the Pacific theater. The 348th Fighter Group, operating from New Guinea, discovered the Thunderbolt's attributes were ideally suited to the vast distances and severe conditions of the Pacific War. Colonel Neil Kirby, commanding the 348th, devised specialized Pacific tactics. On October 11, 1943, Kirby led 4 P-47s against 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak, personally eliminating 6 adversaries in a single engagement, earning the Medal of Honor. The Japanese, accustomed to confronting agile but fragile American fighters, were unprepared for the P-47's combination of firepower and durability. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who encountered P-47s over New Guinea, later wrote, "We designated them monsters. Our 20mm cannon, capable of destroying a P-40 with minimal impacts, appeared ineffectual. I discharged dozens of rounds into a single Thunderbolt and observed its departure. Their return fire was terrifying. Currents of heavy projectiles that dismembered aircraft. The P-47N, engineered specifically for the Pacific, incorporated augmented fuel capacity with wet wings containing 93 gallons each, extending range to 2,350 miles. This variant would escort B-29s to Japan, demonstrating that the short-legged fighter of 1943 had evolved into a genuine long-range weapon. Perhaps the ultimate vindication of the P-47's evolution materialized in its encounters with German jet fighters. The Messerschmitt May 262, with its 540 miles per hour maximum velocity, should have been unassailable by propeller-driven fighters. Yet Thunderbolt pilots discovered they could intercept jets under 2 conditions: during takeoff and landing vulnerability, and in high-velocity dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to eliminate an MB-262 with a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt attained velocities approaching 500 miles per hour, sufficient to intercept the jet in level flight. The jet pilot, confident in his velocity advantage, remained oblivious to the diving P-47 until Meyer's armament discharged at 400 yards. Meyer's combat report noted, the hostile aircraft disintegrated under fire. Substantial components, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not egress. By early 1945, specialized P-47M variants were deployed explicitly to counter German jets and V-1 flying bombs. With water methanol injection boosting power to 2,800 horsepower and refined aerodynamics, these ultimate Thunderbolts could achieve 470 miles per hour in level flight at 30,000 feet, sufficient velocity to intercept jets under specific conditions. Major George Bostwick, commanding the 63rd Fighter Squadron equipped with P-47 MEMS, eliminated 2 May 262s in March 1945. His tactical assessment emphasized firepower over velocity. The jets possess superior speed, but they cannot match our turn radius and cannot withstand punishment, a single sustained burst from our battery, and they fragment as if constructed of parchment. They must decelerate to engage bombers. That is when we intercept them. The definitive demonstration of American industrial supremacy occurred during Unternehmen Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate final offensive to annihilate Allied air power, on January 1, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters, including their remaining elite pilots, launched surprise assaults on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the attack initially succeeded. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground, among other aircraft. A captured German pilot, conducted to the command post, gestured toward the conflagration and taunted, "What is your assessment of that?" Major George Brooking's rejoinder became legendary throughout the 9th Air Force. He indicated the flight line, where ground crews were already clearing damaged aircraft and preparing for replacements. By tomorrow, we will possess 40 new aircraft. What duration will be necessary for you to replace your pilots? The German pilot's smug expression dissipated. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47 D-40s populated the flight line, delivered from depots in England. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots during Bodenplatte, including irreplaceable instructors and squadron commanders, losses they could never recuperate. The Americans lost 134 aircraft total across all assaulted airfields, all replaced within 1 week. The statistics narrated the story of inexorable defeat. Republic Aviation manufactured 15,683 P-47s during the conflict, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale facility on Long Island completed 1 Thunderbolt hourly, operating continuously. The Evansville plant in Indiana, constructed upon vacant farmland in 1942, was producing 500 aircraft monthly by 1944. Each P-47D necessitated 65,000 individual components, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone contained 2,400 individual elements machined to thousandth of an inch tolerances. Yet American laborers, many of them women with no prior aviation experience, assembled these complex machines with precision exceeding peacetime standards. Ammunition production was equally staggering. Each P-47 sortie required 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. With hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions, ammunition consumption surpassed 10 million rounds monthly by mid-1944. The Lake City Arsenal in Missouri, one of several production facilities, manufactured 30 million rounds monthly. Each cartridge was produced to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch, ensuring reliable feeding through synchronized gun mechanisms. Fuel consumption was prodigious. Each Thunderbolt consumed 100 gallons hourly in normal flight, up to 300 gallons in combat with water injection engaged. The 9th Air Force alone consumed over 25 million gallons of aviation fuel monthly by late 1944, all transported across the Atlantic in tankers that were themselves products of American mass production. Even more impressive than aircraft production was pilot training. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots annually from advanced training, more than Germany had trained during the entire war. Each P-47 pilot received a minimum of 400 flight hours before entering combat, including 100 hours in advanced fighters. German pilots, by contrast, were entering combat with fewer than 100 total hours by war's conclusion. The quality manifested in combat. American pilots arrived in Europe trained in formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery, and tactics. They had practiced against captured German aircraft, comprehending their adversaries' capabilities and limitations. They understood their aircraft systems intimately, having studied technical manuals unavailable to German pilots. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, arriving in England in September 1944, exemplified the American training advantage. I logged 420 hours, including 75 in the P-47. I had engaged towed targets, practiced deflection shooting, analyzed gun camera footage from actual combat. On my initial mission, I understood precisely my responsibilities. The German pilot I confronted could not have possessed half my experience. It was not an equitable contest. In March 1945, Hauptmann Josef Priller, the same pilot who had derided P-47s as pregnant cows 2 years prior, was interviewed by German propaganda officials seeking to bolster morale. His statement, deemed too demoralizing for publication, revealed the comprehensive transformation in German attitudes. The Thunderbolt is the ultimate fighter bomber ever constructed. Its firepower is unprecedented, weapons that never jam, never overheat, never exhaust ammunition under normal combat conditions. It delivers bombs like a medium bomber, discharges rockets like artillery, and engages like a fighter when requisite. But beyond the machine is its representation, unlimited American production. They lose 10, they manufacture 20. We lose 1, it is permanently lost. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. They possess fuel for training, ammunition for practice, spare components for everything. We possess nothing but courage. And courage absent resources is merely postponed defeat. We ridiculed them in 1943. We are not ridiculing now. When you hear those guns, you understand death has announced itself. The sound torments us. Mechanical, precise, inexorable. Like everything American, It concerns overwhelming material superiority. They did not defeat us through superior tactics or more valiant pilots. They interred us beneath an avalanche of steel and lead. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed predominantly nominally. Fuel shortages immobilized most aircraft. Experienced pilots were deceased or captured. Airfields were cratered ruins. Yet even with aircraft and fuel, German pilots confronted an impossible equation. Engagement meant confronting P-47 formations that dominated every altitude from ground level to 40,000 feet. Feldwebel Klaus Brettschneider, one of the final German pilots trained in 1945, flew precisely one combat mission before the war concluded. His encounter with P-47s over Leipzig persisted 12 seconds. I observed them diving from above, 4 Thunderbolts in impeccable formation. I attempted to turn, but they were excessively rapid. The leader fired from 500 meters. My aircraft shuddered as if struck by sledgehammers. The engine detonated. The wing separated. I barely egressed. While parachuting, I observed them annihilate my entire staffel. 6 fighters eradicated in under 1 minute. The firmament precipitated burning aluminum and human remains. The psychological impact was absolute. German pilots developed what medical officers termed Jabo fever, physical stress symptoms manifesting when Thunderbolts were reported. Veterans who had confronted Spitfires and Hurricanes without trepidation became physically ill before missions against P-47s. The distinctive thunder of approaching Thunderbolts incited panic among ground troops who understood that survival necessitated immediate concealment. The final P-47 operational statistics defied comprehension. In Europe, 3,752 German aircraft destroyed aerially, 3,315 aircraft destroyed terrestrially, 86,000 railway wagons destroyed, 9,000 locomotives destroyed, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles destroyed, 68,000 trucks destroyed, 60,000 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. In the Pacific, 697 Japanese aircraft destroyed aerially, 150 aircraft destroyed terrestrially, 1,500 vehicles destroyed, 150 locomotives destroyed, innumerable barges, vessels, and installations. The 9th Air Force alone, primarily equipped with P-47s, flew 213,873 combat sorties, delivered 120,000 tons of bombs, discharged 135 million rounds of ammunition, and launched 60,000 rockets. Thunderbolt units achieved a 4.61 kill ratio in aerial combat, while maintaining the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter bomber. Behind these figures resided the human cost. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 28,000 pilots killed combating Western Allied forces. Many succumbed to the concentrated fire of American heavy machine guns. Each loss represented years of training Germany could never replace. By war's conclusion, the average German fighter pilot possessed fewer than 30 combat hours. The average P-47 pilot exceeded 200. At the Luftwaffe Interrogation Center at Oberursel, captured Allied pilots were debriefed by German intelligence. Records captured in 1945 revealed German assessments of Allied aircraft. The P-47 file, continuously updated throughout the war, demonstrated the complete opinion reversal. April 1943, large unmaneuverable fighter, inferior to German types in all performance parameters except dive speed. Machine gun armament insufficient against cannon-armed fighters. Assessment, minimal threat. December 1943, exceptional high-altitude performance, extreme structural integrity, firepower increasingly problematic, pilots demonstrating improved tactics. Assessment, significant threat above 25,000 feet. June 1944, dominant fighter bomber, superior to all German types above 20,000 feet. Firepower devastating against all target categories. Structural strength renders shoot-down extremely difficult. Assessment, critical threat at all altitudes. March 1945, ultimate fighter bomber of the war, combination of firepower, durability and performance unparalleled. Pilot quality exceptional. Assessment, unsurvivable in direct engagement. In 1985, at a reunion of German and American fighter pilots in Phoenix, Arizona, former adversaries convened peacefully. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, former commander of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, was questioned regarding the P-47. His response, recorded on video, encapsulated the complete transformation. "We committed a catastrophic error in 1943. We observed this substantial heavy fighter and ridiculed it. The Americans comprehend nothing of air combat," we declared. They have constructed a bomber and designated it a fighter. We were the ones who lacked comprehension. The Americans did not attempt to engineer a European fighter, they constructed an American one, designed around production, firepower, and survivability. They understood that in a war of attrition, the aircraft capable of absorbing punishment and delivering devastating firepower would prevail. They were correct. The initial occasion I piloted a captured P-47 post-war, I comprehended everything. The power was incredible. It ascended as if descending upward. The cockpit was commodious, visibility superb, controls precise. It was a pilot's aircraft encased in armor. But what truly impressed me was the realization that America manufactured over 15,000 of these complex machines while waging a two-ocean war. Each necessitated an engine more complex than anything Germany produced. Yet they manufactured them more rapidly than we could produce simple fighters. That was the moment I recognized we never possessed a possibility. Those guns, we designated them Roosevelt's piano due to their acoustic signature. Once you heard that sound, it remained indelible. Many of my comrades heard it for their final occasion. The P-47 did not merely defeat the Luftwaffe, it obliterated it. The P-47's design epitomized American industrial philosophy perfectly, brute force engineering supported by unlimited resources. Every component was overbuilt, overpowered, and over-engineered. The wing spars could support 40,000 pounds, triple the aircraft's loaded mass. The engine mount could tolerate 12 G-forces. Control cables were duplicated throughout with automatic redundancy systems. The ammunition feed system alone constituted an engineering marvel. 8 independent ammunition containers, each holding 425 rounds, fed via electric boost motors to prevent jamming during high G maneuvers. The guns were electrically heated to prevent altitude freezing. Each weapon possessed its own charging mechanism and could be individually synchronized. Convergence was adjustable from 150 to 400 yards, enabling pilots to optimize for their preferred engagement range. Even post-war, some German veterans maintained the P-47 triumphed through quantity, not quality, that German fighters were technically superior but overwhelmed numerically. Combat records refute this. In engagements with numerical parity, P-47s consistently prevailed. The heavy machine gun armament, dismissed as inferior to cannon, proved more effective in actual combat. Analysis of gun camera footage revealed why. Cannon shells, while individually more destructive, required precise aiming and possessed limited ammunition, typically 120 to 200 rounds total. The P-47's weapons generated a probability cloud of projectiles, guaranteeing impacts even with imperfect aim. At standard engagement ranges, a 2-second burst delivered at least 20 rounds into a fighter-sized target, sufficient to ensure destruction. The ammunition itself was superior. American .50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds utilized a delayed action fuse, ensuring penetration before detonation. The incendiary compound combusted at 3,000 degree EF, sufficiently intense to ignite aluminum structures. German 20mm shells, while heavier, frequently detonated upon surface impact, causing spectacular but sometimes superficial damage. The P-47 Thunderbolt remains the most massive single-engine piston fighter ever mass-produced. Its empty weight of 10,000 pounds exceeded the gross weight of certain twin-engine fighters. Its engine generated more power than entire bomber formations from the preceding war. Its weapons delivered more firepower than an infantry squad. Yet it was constructed by the thousands, piloted by adolescents barely beyond secondary school, and maintained under combat conditions by mechanics who acquired their expertise within weeks. The transmutation of German opinion from derision to terror required fewer than 2 years. During that period, the flying milk bottle became the most dreaded aircraft in the Luftwaffe's experience. Veterans who had confronted Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Soviet Yaks without flinching discussed P-47s in hushed tones decades after the war. At the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a preserved P-47D resides among other legendary fighters. Its placard enumerates specifications and battle honors, but the authentic narrative is conveyed by a modest display case containing expended .50 caliber cartridge casings and a segment of gun camera footage depicting a Focke-Wulf 190 disintegrating under fire. Beneath the display, a quotation from an unidentified German pilot extracted from a 1945 interrogation report states, "We laughed upon our initial observation, portly, unsightly American fighters that could not turn, could not climb, could not engage. We ceased laughing when we recognized they required neither turning nor climbing capacity. They merely directed those weapons toward you, and you ceased to exist." The laughter perished with our comrades. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of derision and concluded the war as an instrument of annihilation. In the interim, 8 synchronized Browning machine guns rewrote the principles of aerial warfare and interred the Luftwaffe beneath an avalanche of lead. German pilots had ridiculed the ungainly American fighter in April 1943. By May 1945, no German pilots remained to laugh. The Thunder had articulated its verdict, and the firmament belonged to America.